last week got me thinking about
Dangerous.
stuff, yeah. And in particular, your question around how can people do things for themselves. So I thought we might start with Dan Pink's, what is it? Purpose?
Mastery, autonomy, and purpose.
Yeah, I go the other way around. Purpose, autonomy, mastery.
It's so funny. There's probably a whole podcast in just that. Which
Yes.
way do you start?
Yeah, exactly. So for me, so I'd like to actually talk about purpose because I realise that there's a whole bunch of stuff around governance that a lot of projects, whether they're agile or not agile, doesn't really matter, are broken. Of the sort of 50-ish projects that I've been involved with in a sort of project rescue slant, I would say that 48, 49 of those failed on purpose. I don't mean they failed on purpose. They failed, they failed on purpose. They failed to have a clear purpose. And I think this is one of the things that we use that a lot to make the Spartan approach work, but it doesn't really matter whether you're doing Spartan or anything else. It's still a really, really important thing. So I want to sort of explore that a little bit and talk about the sorts of mistakes that people make and the traps to avoid, and give some examples of what is a good purpose for a project. Why do you need a purpose instead of a scope document? Talk a little bit about how we work in IT traditionally, like why do teams not have purpose? And hopefully that's useful. And then a separate chat, maybe next week, maybe this week, on autonomy and how once you've got good purpose, what are the challenges to creating an environment where people can actually be autonomous? Because I think that mastery comes from the other two. I don't think you really need to work on mastery if you have purpose and autonomy, is my experience. So let's talk about projects and purpose.
Okay.
You okay with that?
I'm very okay with that, yeah. I like the way you had a surprise topic for me to talk from.
Yeah, go on.
Well, you were immediately prompting a couple of thoughts on these things, which I'd be interested in your thoughts on, and obviously it's on your mind. Ironically, I think autonomy is purpose. That's the purpose of something, autonomy. So I've got a bit of a block there that I might need to come to and make it not a separate podcast because I think that they're linked. I also think mastery is also purpose. So I think that we might have to cover those off today. We'll see how we go. The first thought that came to mind as you talked about it was this. 48 out of 50 projects failed because of a lack of purpose or on purpose. By lack of purpose, I know what you mean. I was actually reflecting on this with someone this week. I feel like I've been on hundreds of retreats, both at a corporate purpose level, a team purpose level, or an individual purpose level. And I feel that they're expensive. The purpose that we agree on is watered down. And I notice many people don't stay connected to the purpose beyond the event that they're at, right? They make these big commitments and say, this is my purpose, but then fail. Yep. So they're expensive, they take too long, they're watered down, and they lack commitment. And I'm not talking about projects, because I'm not a projects guy, that's your world. Does that equate when you see organizations set their purpose? Is that what you... Is that
pretty much, yeah.
Oh, okay, well, end of podcast, thank you.
Yeah, it's in the traditional world, when you come in and talk to a project team and say, why are we here, what are we trying to achieve, 48 times out of 50 people have said something that had nothing to do with purpose. They said, we're trying to change the XYZ system, we're trying to revitalize the call center system or whatever, right? And in traditional projects, that makes perfect sense because, if you think about how those projects actually come about, you've got some people who do some work on a thing called a cost-benefit case, like a business case. So they think about the benefits, and then they go, okay, well, what's it going to cost us to fix that? So to figure all that stuff out, they've got to actually figure out what they're going to do before they even figure out what the cost is. So typically they spend, the first week thinking about the benefits, which is, for me, benefits equals purpose. Okay, the benefits from cost benefit, the reason you're doing a project, the purpose for the project, is really the benefit statement. But it's a business benefit statement. It's not an outcome in the sense that we get a new call center system. It's an outcome in the fact that we can take calls in 50% less time. So we can get twice as many calls through the same call center, or we can downsize, or whatever it is. Now, because people do the whole cost benefit thing, and then they have to socialize that for about a year and get support for it, and then go to New York and ask the board for money to do the big call center project. They've produced a whole bunch of artifacts as part of that to figure out, okay, like a technical architecture. They've got a feeling of, what are all the bits that they've got to bolt into, all the integration points. They've done a huge amount of work. I mean, they've really done a third of the project already. Right? And they've spent a huge amount of money doing that. They don't track it, right? Or we don't track it, I should say. So it makes sense then that someone else has figured out what the benefits are, and then you just give these documents to the team. And then, that's delivery. That's the digital team gets to deliver the thing that someone else defined, right? And that's a problem for two reasons. And they cut across purpose and they cut across autonomy. Because if you give a document to someone and say, deliver that and use all these technologies that someone else made up 12 months ago, there's no autonomy in that, right? You're told what to do, like do that thing. And then there's a whole bunch of rounding error during the delivery of the project where, if the business asks for it, the business gets it. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets thrown in, and then it just gets bigger than Ben-Hur. And so I think from a purpose perspective, it breaks as well, because the team is responsible for delivering this thing, and they're thinking of it in terms of the solution. They're not thinking in terms of the problem they're trying to solve, because they're not given the job to solve the problem. They're told, if you build this thing, we're confident that you're going to solve the problem that we spoke about 1-2 years ago before we got the money from New York. So it's a problem because the team has no motivation whatsoever, right? Motivation comes from autonomy. Motivation comes from purpose. So there's an immediate disconnect there. And if you look at all of the stats, there was some really cool stuff done sort of 10, 20 years ago around the percentage of failures in projects, just traditional projects. Right? And when you break that down, when you're coming into a project after 2 years of failure, and you look at, okay, what is our purpose here? And no one can answer the question. You have to ask yourself, well, how could we have possibly succeeded at any point? So this idea that you can translate, you can make up in advance the system which is going to solve the problem is just pure fiction. I mean, there's this idea in IT circles, and it's been scientifically disproven. People have written books about it 30 years ago. There's one famous one, The Mythical Man Month. It's just this idea that you can predict in a complex environment, predict how you're going to solve a problem is just ridiculous. Anyone who's delivered a project knows how ridiculous that is. So I think that if you take out that, even if you go through a traditional process and you say, well, this is a system we're going to build and this is technology we're going to use, which I think personally is wasteful. But if we do all of that before we do a single thing, I still don't think we should use that as our contract, as our purpose in the team. The team should be aware of the benefit statement. So the team should be aware that we're trying to cut the amount of time it takes to take an advert in a call center on the phone by 50%. They should be aware of that, because then that can affect the decision they make every day. That can affect how they prioritize their work. It can, they could look over here in a high value area, or they can look over here in a low value area. If they don't know what value is, if they don't know what the purpose is, they can't make that call. So they end up, in my experience, they end up focusing on a whole bunch of stuff that is of extremely low value, and they don't focus on the things that are genuinely going to reduce the amount of time it takes to take a call in a call center, or reduce the turnaround time to offer a student a place on a course from 13 weeks to 8 weeks. If the team knows that that's their objective, even if you've set a few things in stone, there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of motivation that comes out of that, because they go, oh, right, I get what I'm trying to achieve here. So I think that we should get out of the habit of handing people solutions to deliver. And we should, fair enough, if you've got some guidelines within which they have to operate, give them the guidelines. My preference is, don't do all that work. Right? don't do all that work before you start the project. Be clear about what your problem is and give the problem to the team to solve. In a digital world, that's possible. In other worlds, it's I don't believe it is necessarily, because the costs can be very, very different. But in a digital world, you can always solve the problem with a reasonably fixed budget, certainly on a small scale. So.
It's leading to a couple of questions for me. I mean, I love the idea that people given autonomy will execute against a purpose. I love the idea, and but I have some different experiences on that. No matter how hard you fight for a purpose or how high you fly that flag, humans will always deviate, I think. And that's a necessity of human nature to deviate. It's actually also a necessity to sabotage oneself or the organization that you work for, consciously or subconsciously, to challenge. So I have that sort of in the back of my mind, but that's not really the question. It's just a preface to the question. I wonder, it feels a bit industrial age to do the research and say, go and do that, and then do it with those technologies. But it does feel like, it does feel very directive, but there has to be a reason for that. And I also have to think about compartmentalization of skills, why a certain person does the research and the approval and then the other people do the work and the building in a directed way. Like, is there no world in which that is efficient?
I'd like to talk about both the points you made.
Okay.
I have a fundamentally different view on whether people will deviate from the purpose. I agree with you in general, okay, but I'm talking about digital projects where you've got a cross-functional team of people who are capable of delivering the technology. And my experience across, well over 300 projects, where you give the team that purpose and you give them the tools they need to get the job done. You may direct them in terms of roughly the types of technologies you want to use, but it's not the technical solution. It's not the architecture. It's not it's a blank sheet of paper. Right? You might end up with 21 systems integrated, but you start with a view that you're going to build a small thing and release it to one person. So I philosophically agree with you generally, but I think if we narrow our focus down onto delivering digital solutions around core systems, which is my thing, I disagree. I see people, the better job I do at defining the purpose for the team before they start, the happier they are, the faster they get the job done for less money. The more vague I am, or the more I fail to even produce a strong statement, the more frustrated they are, the more demotivated they are. I lose resources. I can think of one very specific example where, we had exactly that type of project, and I actually lost one of our better resources. He just left the company. Said, like, this wasn't the shit I joined to do.
Yeah.
So there's that. I think that the reason this thing happens in two phases isn't a skills compartmentalization. I don't think that people go away and do a bunch of work. Excuse me. I don't think people go away and do a bunch of work because they got a different skill set. I think they go away and do some work before the project team starts, because we currently have this philosophy of funding everything at once, which is a whole topic in its own. Right? So if you look at the root cause of most evil when it comes to digital projects, the reason they blow out, the reason they always have these ridiculous budgets like $20 million, which just never happen, is that I keep using New York as an example because one of the companies I've worked with a lot over the last 20 years is headquartered in New York. And you have to go to New York to ask for money. Right? So it's just a nice way of distinguishing the first part of the program. And the problem is with doing that is you've got to go with a budget. You've got to know the total budget, and it's all at once. You've got no choice. And that basic idea of only funding things in one chunk instead of two chunks, like a small pilot and then the rest, is just fundamentally not set up for a world that has complexity in it. Where, what's the famous phrase, a plan never survives.
First contact with the enemy.
That's it. Well, it's true. The first time you deploy a solution to users, if you build it all at once, the first time you deploy it to someone, you're going to get a shock. You're going to get a surprise. Everyone does. It's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. Now, it might not fail, but, it's questionable outcome. So my point is that I don't think it's a skills segregation. And the skills that those people have are the same skills that I have in my digital team. Those people are perfectly capable of coming up with a UI. These people are perfectly capable of coming up with a philosophy of where we're going to end up and where the transactions are going to, are the transactions going to end up in SAP? Well, it's pretty obvious. It's not that hard.
I think that's actually the key point, Andrew, that it's a bit of an aha moment, if you like. And purpose can work as a guiding principle, and people can have autonomy if they've already got mastery. This is actually the point you were making at the beginning. And if they already have mastery, they are not going to work in an environment in which that you don't give them autonomy and there isn't a purpose.
Yes, if they have a choice.
Yeah. If they have a choice. And for many years, people have had a choice, right? There's been demand for highly skilled people. So it actually brings back to the point at the beginning that these things aren't separate topics. They're probably the
stuff you always end up discussing them all at once.
Yeah, no wonder that Dan Pink wrote that book and he's pretty famous and good at this stuff. I suppose, but you're also you're holding up a mirror to me, and I wonder if I'm fairly atypical of the conservative. No, I don't mean conservative. Because I'm not conservative. I'm actually the opposite of conservative. I'm experimental, reserved. A reserved type of person that likes to be able to touch and see and feel whatever it is and understand what I'm in for. And when I hear you talk about these things this way, it brings to mind, and it's wrong, right? So I'm going to preface what I'm saying is wrong. It brings to mind, is it William Golding's book, Lord of the Flies? Where the purpose is survival. And all you get is people arguing over leadership and, sorry, spoiler alert, ultimately, killing the weak and not really surviving or surviving well anyway. And I wonder if the missing factor there is maybe mastery of survival in an environment, But it does make me think of that. It just makes me think of chaos. And again, I acknowledge the segregation and that it's applying to digital projects. I also acknowledge what you've said about building applications loosely coupled to core applications. And you'll give them the correct words, I know. So I acknowledge the distinction. And again, you're holding up a mirror to perhaps some of my archaic views and some of the things I struggle with. But I wonder if this came out of a conversation this morning I had with someone, actually, one of your customers, funnily enough. And let's just assume what you're saying completely makes sense and is the truth. It's the truth, which, let's assume it is. If people haven't experienced that truth yet, because it's not the presiding wisdom or the overwhelming wisdom yet, other than albeit a few, how do you shift that? How do you shift that to people create purpose-led projects where people have autonomy, and it attracts people of a high level of mastery? Like, how do you do that?
Well, how do I do it versus how does everyone else do it?
Well, how should someone do it?
I do it through choice of only getting involved in environments where that happens, right? So it's like the chicken's way out. I just look at 100 projects and I pick the one that makes sense, just because that's how I want to live my life, and I want to live my life helping people to do things the right way. So the short answer is training, right? There's a, it doesn't take long to have a conversation. It takes one day to have a conversation with the leaders in a team, the business analysts, the team leaders, the project managers, to train them into thinking this way. And it's very easy to come into a project, which is what I've done, my whole life really. Come in after it started, come in after it's been defined a particular way, and retrospectively try and deal with those things. Right? So one of the first questions I asked, when coming in to look at a program of work and review it, was, well, one of the questions I asked is who here has done this before, and usually there's no one. But, purpose is one of the things. So I would say, can you show me the business case? Mm-hmm. And it's startling how few business cases actually, and this is why this is a longer topic than just have an idea what the purpose is, right? Mm-hmm. A startling number of business cases, the majority of business cases that I've seen, don't leave me any better off in understanding what I'm trying to do, why I'm trying to deliver what I'm delivering. And I find that wrong, really. I find it wrong that people should be given money to do something that's that vague. I have my theories, one of which I want to mention. Mm-hmm. So I think step one is go back and retrospectively find why we're doing this thing, right? And that's something that I do in a structured process when we're creating an environment where Spartan can survive and where lean thinking can thrive. And it doesn't take long to figure that stuff out. It's a day's practice where you go through some workshops and you practice some questioning techniques and so on. And if you apply them to any project that you arrive at, you're going to do better. You're going to have more fun. You might not have full autonomy on what technology you get to use because that's already been defined. Mm-hmm. But understanding or restating why we're doing what we're doing and having every member of the team aware of that and so that if you say to them, what are we trying to achieve? They go, we're trying to cut call time in half. Mm-hmm. That is a really powerful thing. And if you can't find it in the business case, what I do is I just get the key people together who are currently determining whether I'm successful or not, like the steering committee or whatever, whoever it is. And I say, look, I think what we're trying to achieve is this. It's not in the business case. But can we just stipulate that this is our North Star? Mm-hmm. And I make a statement like half call time or reduce the turnaround time for a customer service call or, whatever it is. And there's typically only two, and we should talk about those as well. So I think the first step in getting the value out of these types of ideas is to actually apply them retrospectively, apply them to the project you're currently in, and go, why are we here, guys? Because if the whole team can rattle that off and that's what they're thinking about, it will find its way into every part of project life. And that will have a result, in my experience, having done that retrospectively before.
I think that's...
I just want to... I know you want to ask some questions, but it just made me think. So the other really, really common thing is that there is more than one objective. So someone might say we're trying to reduce the number of calls that come into the call center, and we're trying to, through self-service, and we're trying to, increase customer satisfaction. I've seen projects where they've got 5 of those. Okay? That is a mistake. That is just a 101 error. It's a 101 project management issue. You should never have a program of work or project or a digital project that has more than one goal. You have to pick one of the ones that you've listed and decide which one's most important and pick that one. And then come back after your project and you'll find that the other problems have probably mostly gone away. If they haven't, then you can have another project that deals with that one. And the reason you have to have different objectives is that you lose focus and clarity if you've got more than one objective, and you immediately introduce competition between 2 objectives. And typically each objective has a different sponsor. A project with 2 sponsors is a failed project. It's just waiting to happen. It's already failed. You're just marching towards the failure line. So I would say, as well as being clear on purpose, be careful not to fall into the trap of accepting multiple purposes. Use exactly the language that I just used and say, look, we're going to solve all these problems one day, but this program has to solve one solidly. Otherwise, we're going to fail. It's common sense if you think about it.
I do have some questions. As traditional, I've got 90. I really like that nugget, actually, as a takeaway action for any person working at a project level to forensically go through the project they're on and understand its original purpose and recalibrate around that.
Restate, yeah.
I think is a key takeout from almost all of this, like a practical advice, because not everybody has the luxury of being chicken, Andrew, and running away. They're actually in something.
Yeah, I get that. And we are trying to be helpful.
Yeah, that's right. So I really love that, and I really like that connection to purpose. And forgive my lack of understanding, but something that's on my mind is this. What you've said makes sense at a project level. I wonder if people conflate portfolio, program, and project. And I wonder if the cynical listener here might be, well, that's all well and good, but I've got to, and you interchangeably use the words program and project, right? And so should we be drawing a distinction here for what you're talking about is good at a project level versus a portfolio level? Or are you suggesting that you look at the project before you get the portfolio view? And don't you need to explore the portfolio view to get context of the overall, bigger picture?
I think that in theory, a program, I don't use the terms interchangeably. I generally say project or program. I don't mean they're the same thing. I mean,
acknowledge that. No,
it applies to both situations.
Yeah, sure, you said program, and then I meant project. So I'm clear.
So, a program is I'll call it a loose collection. I think if you go beyond a project, so a project is a team of people delivering, in my simplistic terms, a code base. Okay, in a digital world where we're building lightweight solutions around the core systems, I advocate building using lightweight technologies instead of going out to market and spending 2 years trying to buy a solution that's not going to be digital anyway. Yes, go out and buy your core systems, absolutely, and your CRM and your financial system and your student management system. But digital is not that, and people keep buying products to try and be digital, and it just doesn't work. So, in the context of digital projects, I think the easiest thing to do is to say a project equals a code base. And on another day, we're going to talk about product mentality, because I fundamentally disagree with it. The idea that you call these things products. So then a program is a collection of projects. And as soon as you start looking at more than one project, I ask myself, what are the chances that that's the same sponsor? What's the chances that that is the same goal? What is the chances that that's the same ... It's usually, at the very least, a different business process. And I think there can be some similarities across those things, but I struggle to see why you would fund those, manage them, track them as a unit called a program. And I don't think that you should manage them as a unit called a program either. That again comes back to this whole thing of, am I funding them all at once? So sometimes the reason they exist in my experience is that they go, well, we've got all these things and they're all aimed at, reducing the number of calls that come to the call center, and there's different initiatives under that. What typically tends to happen is they break them down into technology stacks, and each of those is a project. And that is just, if you look at Program Management 101 and Program Design 101, that's one of the key fails as well. But these things are generic problems with programs, in the same way that not having a clue why you're doing what you're doing is a generic problem. The problem of grouping things together or splitting them apart for the wrong reasons is, I think, a mistake. So if there's a takeaway that I can give to people who are looking at something as a program, is don't break it down by tech stack, don't break it down by business unit, break it down by process. Okay, so value stream thinking is like, okay, what's the trigger for this process? So, I don't break my I don't have a research management program. I have 6 business processes in research that I'm trying to fix. And sure, I might group them together and say we're doing these things as a program, but I don't think you should be spending a huge amount of money outside of each of those projects doing anything. And they're broken down by business process. And really, each of those should have its own benefit statement. Each of those should have its own cost, attributable cost by the time you're finished. Each of them should have its own pilot. So really, where you end up with is much more project focus in terms of where your money's being spent. More of it's being spent in the projects, delivering real code. Less of it is being spent in some layer above that, managing it per se. Because each of the decisions about how much money to put into each of those things should depend on the size of that business process. How many humans are involved? How many times do we do it? How many customers are involved? So a big business process, using those metrics, we should spend more money on that and less money on this other one. What quite often happens in these programs is we say, we get this big chunk of money to do them all, and then we end up spending similar amounts of money on each of them, which is just wrong.
Is there a to form up the cost of actually there's a few questions, so let me get my thought right on that. Moving to a value stream build of a program, is that a fundamental shift from what exists today? I mean, statistically, is it mostly done by development or technology stacks?
It's done by, my experience is it's done by business system ownership. Which are typically product aligned. Because we've got this fear of doing digital ourselves. We keep trying to buy products that do it, and they just don't. So a really good example is, you'll have one person with a budget to do ServiceNow, and you'll have another person with another budget to do Salesforce, another person with another budget to do the learning management system, whatever you want to call it. And it's just fundamentally broken because you can't fix the business processes because the business processes fit across those things. They start in student land, they go into, a team that is administering business process C, let's call it thesis submission in research, right? ServiceNow might be part of the solution, but you shouldn't break your program down and have one team doing the ServiceNow component, one team doing a bit of digital, one team doing SAP, one team doing the payment system. And that's quite often how it does get broken down. It's like, one team goes off and does projects, the payments piece. You can't deliver a single piece of functionality to a single student or a single professor until all of those things are lined up and the planets align and all the stars align as well. And they just never do. Because each of those people is pulling in a different direction technically. They're pulling in a different direction from a business perspective, from a loyalty perspective, from a political perspective. It's just painful. You need one team with all of those skills in it. So from a purpose perspective, I think there's also a quality in the statement of purpose. I think there's you're trying to define what success looks like. So you need to spend a lot more time asking questions about the problem. Because a lot of people will say, we've got a problem. The point that I was going to come back to earlier on is important here. So a lot of times people don't want to state what the business objective to a program is. Okay, if I'm trying to cut the number of people who are in the call center, it's politically insensitive. It's humanly insensitive to make that statement. And there is a project that fails for 10 years in a row. Okay, because you're not being honest with people, you're not being honest with the project team who's trying to deliver this thing, the reason that they're doing this thing, and you're not being honest with the users about why you're doing this thing. I think there's a whole world of ethical cost-cutting programs that we're going to see happening over the next 10, 20 years, because I think people have finally learned that you don't just have to get rid of people out of an organization. You can cross-train them. In a world where micro-credentials are becoming the norm rather than the exception, people are, even people of my age bracket, right, are looking back and going, well, I fancy doing this new thing, and I'll go get some new skills for that, and I'll learn on the job, and I'll reduce my pay or whatever. I think there's a way of approaching these things, reforming them. One example I've seen, quite some time ago with one of my clients is they said, well, look, we're not going to get rid of anyone, but the call center is a high turnover environment. So we're just not going to replace anyone. So we're going to gradually implement this new technology. And as people leave to go on tour, or, the traveller student that came to the call centre 2 years ago decides to go back to England or US or wherever, we're not going to replace them, right? And that's a nice gradual way of reducing the cost. The other way is to be honest, but just not quite as brutally honest, and say we're trying to get a larger number of calls through each human, right? Which is true. To reduce the number of people in the call center, you've got to get more calls through the same number of humans. And I think the other tool that you can use is to say to people, is to actually think about and have a plan, and give people choices and say, look, a certain percentage of people can be made redundant if that's true. So we're going to go into a consultation, which is going to be run by a collection of you people. You get to vote on that committee. So there's 7 people are going to be on a committee. They're going to make decisions on who's offered what and when. So choose wisely, and have a more positive environment where people can go, what, I've been thinking about taking a redundancy if it's been offered to me because I'm sort of 5 years off retirement, or I want to go into this new thing. I'm just waiting and waiting and waiting for redundancy. Well, why don't we offer these people redundancy? If it's like a win-win. We never look at it that way. It's always got to be this sort of what do you call it when people are at loggerheads? Confrontational.
I think you just said it.
Yeah,
loggerheads.
There's 1,000 things. If you just sit down and think about it for 10 minutes, there's 1,000 ways of getting around that, so that you can be honest with people about what you're trying to achieve. That honesty, that clarity is just. It's hard for me to explain how powerful that is as a single thing to get right.
I would love to understand this topic more deeply from a CEO perspective. Actually, not me, but somebody else of a big publicly listed company, a Westpac or a Telstra or you name it. Now CBA. What is a Westpac? Anyway, any one of those big players. And understand the context of which they look at that through. And the reason that's on my mind is I love this. I've never heard that term actually, ethical cost cutting, and the concept of. I mean, it's so logical now. You've said it. I really love it. I'm going to be saying it every day and claim it as my own.
That's not my idea.
Okay, whoever's idea it was, I've stolen it. Just so you know. Then they say, "Well, there's no new great ideas." Anyway. I would love to understand why these smart people who, they probably thought about this and they've probably reflected on it also, and I wonder what it is that makes them do it anyway. And I was in a conversation this week, and we were talking about the pressure, the pressure and the power of big vendors on executives, CEO, CIO, to accept what the market says and listen to the echo chamber of pick a product.
Yeah.
And there's a whole topic around how they get to say no and be brave, and I don't even be brave. I think they're brave to do that job anyway. Probably brave. I think you called yourself the chicken, so it means they're the brave ones anyway. But how they get the rewards for that bravery by not being forced down a path that, because they're smart, they know is going to end up in strife. And so I think, so I'm interested, the summary of that is I'm very interested in why these big organizations do it anyway. And I'm very interested in how the executives avoid just stepping into the echo chamber and doing what everyone else is doing. Do you have a view on why they do it anyway? I mean, what's your thinking?
2 reasons. One is, I don't think anyone talks about the alternative enough, and that really needs to come from big leaders like CEOs and stuff, for people to follow. So I think there's just not. It's one of those things where people just don't think about the alternative. People don't think about the alternative to running projects with scope document, even agile projects, which is silly. So I think there's one thing, which is they can't see something else to do. They just do the same thing because it's the only way, or perceived to be the only way. I think the second one, though, is this fear culture that enters whenever you're dealing with any situation which is vaguely legal or accounting or tax. And I've had experience of trying to collaborate with tax accountants and lawyers on several occasions and really struggled with something that's out of the ordinary. Because lawyers in particular, because it's their job, right? Their job to protect the organisation. They have to tick off every single thing that could go wrong. And if all you think about is the things that go wrong, you're never going to try something new. So my view is that, like in a situation where you are trying to reduce the number of people in a particular admin part of the business, it's hard to do anything else but to just do what the lawyers say, because you've got to be a pretty stand-up person to go, I'm listening to your advice, and I understand what you're saying, and you've explained the risks, but I'm going to sign off on those risks. And I'm not sure what the risks are, but in my experience, they're perceived risks. They're not real risks. In the same way that if I'm in an APRA-regulated company, there's a hysteria around data governance. There's a hysteria around PII. It's not healthy. It's not a risk mentality. It's not, which is exactly what you're supposed to apply, right? What you're taught in those environments is that you must consider risk. You must consider people at risk. You must consider people's personal information. You should never do these things with it. Fantastic. But the behavior that drives is that people don't just sit down and go, okay, well, I'm managing risk this way. We're not doing these things, and it's only these types of people here, and maybe I can sign off with those people. They could be part of this thing, and they could sign off a piece of paper that says I'm happy with that. 1,000 things you could do. People never consider them because they're just this fear culture, especially in large corporates like over $1 billion turnover. So I think they're the two reasons for me: is just a lack of another option perceived, and fear whenever it comes to HR, legals, redundancies, all that sort of stuff. Fear of poor PR. PR is something you can manage, but people worry that they're going to be in the paper saying, they're laying off 250 people.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the thing of fear is it's either, not real and you're just reacting to a perception of something, or it's real, and this, I don't imagine many CEOs or CIOs surviving a 25% share price crash, for example, just because they've made some, brave decisions and the market perceives it badly. I can understand why there's fear. These people have lives and careers outside of the job that they're currently in, and I think that fear is not necessarily something to be ignored.
No, not at all. But you need to consider what you're fearful of and why, and then just break it down and go, okay, well, this is logical, this isn't logical. My experience is that people take the most extreme conservative view, which is damaging to the business. People don't consider the cost of that extreme conservative view. They don't think of the fact that every $100 million they're spending on a change program over a 5-year period is around 5 to 10 times more than they need to spend on that thing, just because a bunch of people are being too conservative. And I'm not suggesting people should take irrational risks. I'm just saying they should consider the risks and look at the situations where there's low risk. There's never zero risk, right? There's no such thing. It doesn't matter what you do. There's always risk, right? But you look at those low risk situations and you should act accordingly. But that doesn't happen. People look at a situation which is genuinely low risk and treat it as if, and they make their decisions based on it being high risk. It's not the idea. And it upsets me that those people aren't responsible for paying the bills.
Sure.
For their decisions, like, security architect that makes a decision that puts security at this level in an area where the risks are at this level. So you've just signed a check that you don't realize you've signed for $50 million over the next 5 years for that one decision, which was a poor decision.
I mean, I know we're talking fairly broadly, but the motivators for someone to do that are, there's such a plethora of reasons that someone could do that, including risk. I get it. My very cynical side talks about empire building and egos and a whole load of stuff. And there's some very human elements to it as well. It does make me think that, it's part of the reason we're doing this, right? It's to cut through the echo chamber and give people options, visionary leaders an option to get a different type of outcome. So it lands.
I'm not a risk taker. I'll just say that. Right?
Sure.
So I do everything that I do because I perceive it to be a lot lower risk than anything I've done before in IT.
I'll reflect on that, Andrew, because I think
It's
I'll go back
risky
to it.
emotionally because it's different, but it's much lower financial risk. It's much lower reputational risk. It's much less budgetary risk in terms of we spend the money and we don't solve the problem. It's much more tactile. It's much more connected. You get a better solution because you build a solution with users using your tool in production, your digital solution in production. It's just lower risk, like dramatically lower risk. I hate risk. People perceive me to be, we have these conversations about risk and people will listen and go, oh, this guy's a bit of a risk taker. I'm not at all. I'm the reverse. I just consider the risks, which is what you're supposed to do.
I have this imagery in my mind of you, and that
I don't want to know.
It's okay, you're fully clothed. But you are on a tightrope, and you would be the type to walk a tightrope. I mean, I know it's analogous, and it's because you can do it, but it's just you walking the tightrope with a group of very good tightrope walkers behind you, and they are experts at this thing. The risk for you isn't about those people; it's about everybody else and their ability to walk that tightrope. I see you as a guy who's very good at doing what you do. You are expert at that thing, and therefore you're right. It's not a risk, but it's unusual. It's an unusual skill set. I think
for people watching me on YouTube, you can see me shaking my head already, right? I think the correct analogy for the way that I work and the people I work with is we're sat on a sofa, chilled out, having a cup of coffee with our laptops. It's the opposite of hard. It's the easiest thing.
I think what I want to say about that is that you make the tightrope walking look like you're sitting on a sofa, chilling out, having a cup of tea. That's my point. The point is anyone can sit on a sofa, anyone can walk a tightrope, but I get it. One of the other things about you, Andrew, is not only are you a self-declared not risk taker, and I don't think you take risks. That's not the point I'm trying to make. But you're also very specific, which is a common theme for me. And my analogy can be wrong, but the point I'm trying to make is that you're good at what you do. I'll link a thought. I'm very mindful of your time, actually. I'll link a thought all the way back to the beginning, and it's like this bit that you said. Looking at my notes, ethical cost cutting. I said that people, this isn't my research, it was a piece of research I read that was done for a bank, actually, and it was for the executive, and it said that, and it's the quote from the beginning here, that your people will consciously or subconsciously undermine themselves and the organizations that they work for by nature. So you have to be prepared for that as an executive. I wonder if that would be fixed if they were ethically cost-cutting and ethically setting purpose. And I'm not saying not being commercial, because there's realities, but most humans, all humans, are smart enough to work it out, right? And when they see these programs of work with a veiled purpose, of course they're going to do that. And it really makes me, it's actually given me a great pause for thought about that research that I read. I'm going to go at least 10 years ago is actually incorrect. It talked to the human problem as opposed to the executive problem about how you get them not to sabotage. So thank you for the pause for thought.
So I think we're talking about different groups of people. And maybe that's why I answered the question slightly differently from how you asked it. But the people doing the work, if they're given clear purpose, my experience is they don't want to subvert it. They want to achieve. It's a good goal. Like they look at it and go, wow, that's a good idea. Mm-hmm. So I think where I do see subversion is in people who care more about their CV than, so in the layers of management above that. So somewhere between the executive and the team responsible for actually delivering the solution. And my ultimate, the people I like the least are the people who have made decisions in front of me and in front of their own business peers against the interests of their company, against the financial interests of their company, because it's what they want to put in their CV. And I think that is just, knowingly, right? I think that is just despicable. And I'd like to say it doesn't happen very often.
Is it okay if they're making a choice that's not in the financial interest of their company, as long as it's a moral choice?
I'm not talking about moral choices.
I know.
I don't know.
I just wonder where they fit in the spectrum.
I'm not a philosopher, so that's a tough question. I feel like it's a trap. It's like the railway thing. You know, you got one person on this railway track and two people on this railway track, and you've got a switch, and you could just flick it towards the one person.
There's no traps here.
It sounds like there's a right answer, but there's not really, right?
I'd like it, if anyone has made it this far into mine and Andrew's conversation, to tell us whether you think me and Andrew are talking to different purposes, because actually I think we're talking about exactly the same thing, which is often the case for us.
So I wouldn't mind saying something else about, again, towards your theme. I've just taken your theme from last week, from our last podcast, and I'm going to try and apply it in all of the things that we talk about. But again, as a takeaway, right? So in a takeaway for purpose, I would say, if you haven't had the experience of, trying to figure out a good purpose, my experience is that there are like 5 rough types of benefit statement that I've worked on in business cases. But I think there's only really 2 that happen often. So I think it's really simplifying if you just think about these 2. One is more transactions through the same number of humans. So that would be cutting call time by 50%, because then you can take twice as many calls as a call center operator, right? Or it could be a team handling special considerations for students. Student asks for a special consideration, and you make that team more efficient, and they can get through twice as many special consideration approvals or denials or whatever you call it, requests. So that's type number 1. And I think for me, that's the most common type. And that's the most common cost metric. And you can express it in different ways. You can say, we're trying to shrink the size of the call center or the team, or we're trying to handle higher volumes through the same team without putting new people on, or whatever you want to say. But it still boils down to more transactions. And by transactions, I don't mean financial transactions. I mean a special consideration is a transaction, a student's application is a transaction, a call into the call center of a publishing company is a call, is a transaction for the purposes of a digital solution. Number 2 is reduced turnaround time. I don't mean reduced call handling time is an example of category 1, right, which is a large number of transactions through the same number of humans. Turnaround time is the amount of time it takes me to get back to someone on something. And that quite often happens in things like customer onboarding. Like if you're at aged care and it takes too long to get back to a customer when they're first being onboarded, that's usually a problem of a different nature. It's not just a cost issue. Quite often, it's actually a revenue issue. So if it takes me 13 weeks to offer a law student a place, and there's another university in town that on average offers in 8 weeks, then human behavior is such that they'll take the first offer because you haven't got back to them for a couple of weeks after they got the offer. They're getting nervous, they take the first offer. So you lose an amount of revenue as a result of that, an amount of profit. And most organizations will know what a customer of that type is worth. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in some cases. So I find it quite useful for people who are just experimenting with this stuff and trying to come up with a good, success measure, is to actually just think, okay, well, which of those 2 am I headed for? And there are others. There's like customer satisfaction is a good one, like brand. If someone says brand, just run away, because how do you measure brand? How do I know if I'm running a project, I've got no idea how whether I've succeeded or not. Also good. So I think that's key takeaway number 1, and the key takeaway number 2 is it's more powerful to phrase that as a tangible question that you ask a named individual as a representative of that type of individual with a black and white answer. So I don't think it has to be qualitative. It doesn't have to be quantitative. Like saying that we're going to cut call times by 50%, that works because most call centers actually track their average handling time. If you say, I'm going to reduce the amount of time it takes me to offer a law student a place by 25%, and they're not actually measuring it, you got a problem, right? Because you can't state that. So it doesn't have to be quantitative, but if it's not going to be quantitative, and some of my favourites have been qualitative, it's still got to be dramatic. So it's still got to be black and white answer, like hell yeah or hell no. So a good way to do that is to introduce the word dramatically. So you say to someone, have I dramatically reduced the number of inbound contacts that it takes to get a valid application from a student? It's not quantitative, but it's hell yeah or hell no. Okay, so, and then the final piece is be clear who you're asking as a representative of that. And the reason all of these things are important is they sort of lead into a topic around Project Flintstones and pilots. Is you want to use the same metric in a pilot as you roll that out and productionize it. So in a pilot, you want to name the individual. So I'm going to ask James, who is one of the people who would normally deal with the inbound contacts. Actually, Alexander was the real person. So I'm going to ask Alexander, have there been, for this agent that you normally deal with, has there been a dramatic reduction in the number of times they've contacted you to get these 26 applications through the pilot system, which is now turned off, right? Talking about risk, right? Zero risk. So I think that's actionable, right? Because you can retrospectively apply that to your project. You can come up with a nice statement. You can have a person you're going to ask, have we succeeded or not? Now, if you're not running pilots and you're not delivering early and delivering often, like you're not delivering at the beginning of the project, that question can be a bit of a moot point, but it's still useful to have it in your head. Because you can go to Alexander as you're building the system, even if you're building it as one big chunk and delivering it into production in one big chunk, you can still go with some value statements about, okay, we're talking about this and we're talking about this. Which one of these do you think is most dramatically going to reduce the amount of time, the number of contacts? And Alexander will say, that one. Because you've asked the right question.
Alexander sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And on that note, summing up with Alexander, I'm going to have to thank you for your time. And you've given me a lot, as always, to think about. And I'll take the next 10 years to unpack it. Thank you.